Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
I'm going to start with a story this Shabbat. Long ago, a rabbi once asked her students, "How do we know when the night has ended and the day has begun?" And the students thought that they grasped the importance of that question. There are, after all, prayers that are said only in the evening and only in the morning. There are rituals that can be done only during the day or only at night. So it's important to know when the night has ended and when the day has started, because it's important to get all of those things right. So the students thought, and they thought, and they thought, and they thought a little bit more. Before long, one of them raised their hand, and they said, because they live in Nebraska like us, "When I look out into the fields, I can tell the difference between day and night, because when I see what my field is and what my neighbor's field is, that's when I know when the night has ended and the day has started." And another student jumped in, as often happens. "And it's when I look from the fields and I see a house, then I can tell that it's mine and not my neighbor's. That's when the day has started and the night has ended." A different student answered and said, "I know that it's daytime when I can see an animal in the distance and I can tell exactly what kind of animal it is. I know if it's a cow versus a horse versus a sheep or a goat. That's when I know that night has ended and day has started." And another student said, "It's when I look in my garden and I can tell what the colors of the flowers are. When I can tell that that is a red rose and that's a blue hydrangea and that's a yellow tulip, that's how I know that the night has ended and the day has begun." And each answer was, of course, accurate, but it brought more and more sadness to the rabbi who asked the question. And finally, her student said, "Rabbi, what's wrong?" And the rabbi said, "Each one of you in your answers is dividing. You divide your house from your neighbors. You divide your field from your neighbors. You distinguish between the kinds of animals. You talk about the differences in the colors of flowers. What you're talking about, it's what we do. We divide, we separate, we split the world into pieces. But that's not the way of Torah," she said. And the students were shocked for a minute. And one of them said, "So, Rabbi, how do we tell the difference between night and day?" And the rabbi looked at the faces of her students and she said, "It's not when you can divide your field from another, or when you can tell what house is yours or what is not. It's when you look into the face of the person beside you and you can see that that person is your brother, your sister, your friend, your family member, your neighbor. That is when you know that the night has ended and the day has begun." And as I thought about the Torah portion this week, that story came to my mind because in this week in Parshat Bo, we talk about the 9th plague. We talk about 3 plagues, actually, the 8th, 9th, and 10th. But we talk about the 9th plague, which is the plague of darkness. And like I so often tell you, I really believe that each Torah portion comes at the time when we need to hear it most and when it has the most profound lesson to teach us. And so when I started thinking about this week's Torah portion and I thought about the plague of darkness, it resonated with me because I imagine that some of you, like me, have felt a bit dark this week. I felt personally like I've been living in this plague of darkness, this cloud of darkness, not sure where to turn, which direction I might be going, and how to move forward. Because everywhere I look, I see fear. I hear it on every radio or podcast or news report that I turn on. I see darkness, I hear darkness, I hear fear. And something dangerously close to despair, I think. And I have felt immobilized by this plague of darkness and scared for the people that I care about and the people that they care about. The commentaries of our Torah tell us that the plague of darkness in Egypt was not an ordinary darkness. It had a weight to it. It had a heft to it. It was palpable, they say. A Spanish rabbi and philosopher named Bahia wrote about the ninth plague, and he said that the air was darker and it became completely opaque. If a person was sitting, he said, they couldn't stand up. If a person was standing, they couldn't sit down. It was virtually impossible to move in this plague of darkness, as if, he said, the air had become like a solid wall. The Tanhuma, which is a collection of midrash from somewhere between 500 and 800 CE, says that the darkness was such that you couldn't even see another person, even if they were standing just in front of you. The darkness, the commentaries agree, immobilized the people. But the rabbis say that the darkness only affected the Egyptians, not the Israelites. So why would that be the case? And while there's a lot of different interpretations of why that could be, I want to share a particularly moving one that really speaks to me in this moment, and I hope will speak to you. Rabbi Howard Kushner writes in the Eitz Chaim Torah commentary that perhaps the Egyptians were depressed by a series of calamities that had struck them, or by the realization of how much their own comfort depended upon the enslavement of others. The person who cannot see his neighbor, he says, is incapable of spiritual growth, incapable of rising from where he is currently. Let's let that sink in for a minute. The person who cannot see his neighbor is incapable of spiritual growth. If we cannot see each other, he seems to say, we can't see them in their fullness of humanity, then we're incapable of the kind of spiritual growth that I believe our own humanity and Judaism really demand from us. And then Rabbi Kushner really brings the teaching together in a profound way that I think is kind of a linchpin for this moment and how we move forward. He talks about a Talmudic debate about the legal definition of distinguishing day from night, because yes, the Talmud does provide all sorts of very complicated legal definitions about things like the moment you can distinguish day from night. So he references Tractate Berachot, where he says, what is the way that we talk about dawn? What is that moment of dawn, which inspired the teaching in the story that I just shared with you? In the debate, it talks about how early we can say our morning prayers. That's the reason for trying to understand between day and night. How early, it asks, can you say the Shema for the morning Shema? And it says that when one can recognize the face of a friend. That's what the Talmud says. But Rabbi Kushner expands the teaching and he deepens it. And he says that what it really means is that when we can see other people, any human being, and recognize them as friends, then the darkness has begun to lift. So my friends, if you, like me, have been feeling as if you were wandering through a plague of darkness, and perhaps were fearful or even bordering on despair, Rabbi Kushner is giving us the roadmap for how we find our way into the light. If we look into the faces of the people in our communities, really look at them, and see them in the fullness of who they are, see them as unique, beautiful, special, individual human beings, and reach out a hand to help them, and allow the faces of that humanity give us direction so that we don't become complacent in our own lives, and instead remember that we are obligated to stand with and for the vulnerable among us. That is how we dispel darkness. That's how the day begins, and that's how we step into the light. Shabbat Shalom.